the most important thing to recognize is there's no single model, and that each country has to develop its own sort of vision, which is based on its own special history, trajectory, industrial structure, intellectual and scientific capacity. So I think the big lesson is there's no script that you can follow, and the countries have to think about this for themselves, but they can learn from each other, learn from other developing countries more than they can learn from France or the United States or whatever. So, horizontal coordination and communication between the emerging economies like Brazil, China, India, Russia, Indonesia, Turkey, that is probably a very useful thing for countries struggling to try to find a new way to articulate their situation within the global economy, which is changing extremely quickly.
Although they are not really developed countries, in order to become consolidated democracy, I think that they must reconfigure their own state in the direction of facing the developmental challenges together with democratizing their own states. As far as teaching, it's very difficult because first, because the experience is unique, and second, because at the moment, the developed countries, they are really dealing with their own challenges and very inward-looking. And they are not prepared to learn anything, I think.
I think they do have a lot to learn from the more mature democracies about how to include new political actors in the discussions about development, and how to find strategies about combining social and economic development. But I also think that there are lessons that emerging economies could teach, and I think those are more related to the experimentation of new forms of participation and inclusion of civil society in the discussion of development projects.
We should fight against the idea that there's only one recipe, there's only one capitalism, there's only one way by which the Brazilian should be integrated in this capitalism. So I think this is the first lesson. We should challenge the very question, the way you propose it. But I think that also another very important point is realize that the way by which each country may find its place in the new global order is really a mix of very different kinds of reforms, institutional reforms, the way by which these economic possibilities and strategies can fit together in a coherent way.
I think the real question is how any country, developing or not developing, fits into the possibilities today's global political economy makes available. And that's as much a question of the relationship between firms, industries, sectors, as it is a relationship between countries. It seems to me the first thing to do is simply map the regulations, the administrative possibilities that distribute the authority to participate in the global economy among a variety of different institutions.
Well, they can teach a lot. I think what we've been experiencing regarding development problems, regarding wealth transfer problems, and regarding building institutions to deal with this problem is an experience that other countries didn't have. So I think we can do a lot about that. And since the 2008 crisis, I know that different Brazilian institutions have been called to teach how to regulate, for example, financial markets overall in the world. So I think they can teach a lot.
We've been looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. Yesterday we heard about the way in which new state institutions or new legal innovations inside of a developing state might have an impact on development. We learning about questions of democracy and democratic accountability in the context of these state institutions and bureaucracies. Today we've been more focused on more traditional questions of development and distribution and the role of corporate law and private actors in constructing the current allocation of resources globally. And I think all of these pieces are pieces of the puzzle, of a complex puzzle with no one solution. I don't think there's one solution for the state, and I don't think there's one solution for the global poor. And so I think one of the things that's really productive out of this kind of interaction and international interaction, and also with a focus on Brazil, is it gives us a window and a concrete way of beginning to think about the relationship of these different diverse pieces to a concrete place, in this context Brazil, and then to try and generalize out to think about what kinds of lessons we might draw from this experience here in thinking about development in a global context.
The developing countries could learn from the developed countries and from developing countries what is working in the law and development or in the governance of development process. It's not necessary to reinvent the wheel to produce good results. The countries could localize and understand what is working in other countries and adapt this technology for their contexts. And on another hand, these countries could teach other countries, mainly the developed countries, that there are many ways to do the capitalism, or there are a variety of capitalism around the world. So basically, in this multipolar world, developing countries could teach other countries that there are a lot of ways to produce market process, capitalism, and they could contribute to enrich and to enlarge the vision of the global governance that is taking place in the world now.
They have a lot to learn. I think that the understanding of what is a viable and sustainable capitalism is itself a disputed and contested area. So we have models of capitalism which are not working too well even in advanced countries, but we have to learn some things from that. What capitalism has achieved in advanced countries is high levels of organizational capability, high levels of productivity, high living standards, but lots of problems of distribution, periodic and deep financial crises, and actually in other areas of welfare, like the environment, distribution, and so on, hasn't done too well at all. So we have to learn from advanced capitalism the issue of organizational capability building, which I was talking about in my presentation, and industrial policy has to develop the modern sectors and modern capabilities. But on the other hand, we need to also innovate and teach and disseminate new ideas of how capitalism can be organized so that it is more broad-based, it is more fair, it involves people who have been excluded from traditional forms of capitalism, which is more welfarist, which is more sustainable. And so these are very big challenges, and you might not even want to call this capitalism, you might want to call this new forms of organizing society, but to the extent that modern productive activity is based on forms which include private ownership, which include some role for the market, which includes modern forms of organization and hierarchy. Broadly speaking, we are still talking about capitalist structures, but there are many kinds of capitalism, and this is the moment at which the horizon has opened up in terms of how modernization is to be carried out.
I think the developing countries can teach that there are alternative solutions to problems that have been tackled in conventional ways. This is not always the case, but sometimes developing countries develop new institutional, procedural, substantive innovations and solutions that path break, in a sense, they replace with advantages conventional arrangements that have been adopted by developed countries and have never been challenged. So what I think is that developing countries sometimes, not always again, develop and produce and offer creativity, variability and institutional intelligence for development. But the problem is that developing countries, when they do it very quietly. And what I think it should be done is to boost and foster the study of what very interesting developing countries are doing in some very interesting areas.
Developing countries can absolutely learn from one another and teach one another about the ways that social provision and economic development can best occur, and that most importantly, at least from my perspective as an advocate around income inequality and poverty, that developed countries can also learn from what developing countries are doing and what emerging developed countries are doing. And that's why I've been so energized by coming here and hearing the debates and participating in the conversations here. It's been a real pleasure to have my mind stretched in the ways that have been enabled by this conference.